Hello world, my name is Tom Geiser, and this is the first ever NQK Sports person on YouTube. So I want to welcome you all and thank you all for watching. We're going to try to get a show going with different personalities talking about different things, not always obscure sports, but that will be a general theme throughout. Now, today's topic is not necessarily an obscure sport, at least for those in the United States and Japan and Korea, but it is sort of an obscure angle, let's say. And the angle pretty much from my standpoint is, I can't say it any other way, is that I believe that baseball as a superpower or a super sport in the United States is really faltering. It's on its last legs unless someone can revive it. And here's why. And I'm going to go back to the World Series ratings. I know that that's been talked about a lot lately, but I want to use that as an example, as a jumping off point. As you know, that the World Series in 2023 between the champion Rangers and the Arizona Diamondbacks was the lowest watched World Series since they began doing ratings in 1973, and it averaged 9.08 million per game. Now, I'll talk about this again at the end, but just to put some perspective on this. So 9.08, so let's just say 9.1 million for 2023. In 2022, so just last year, 9.1 this year, 11.8. So 2.5 or more million per game for last year's World Series compared to this year's World Series. So just think about that. Just a year ago, over 2.5 million more people watched each game of the World Series than they did this year. So let's go over maybe my top 10, what I would call the top 10 reasons why the World Series and baseball, I believe, is in trouble. But number one would be the fact that baseball lacks that team star marketing. When you think of LeBron James, you think of, depending upon where he is, when you think of LeBron James, you think of Cleveland Cavaliers or the Miami Heat or now the Los Angeles Lakers. When you think of the Golden State Warriors, you think of Steph Curry. When you think of the Boston Celtics, most people probably think of Tatum. So in the NBA, they have it. In the NFL, pretty much now that running backs have been marginalized to a certain degree in the NFL because of play calling, your main stars, and they have been since the NFL was around, started rather, are the quarterbacks. We always knew Tom Brady was with the Patriots. Then we knew he was with Tampa Bay, and we know all the quarterbacks. We know that Rodgers went to the Jets, and we know their names. They have star maker ability. I think the outlier in all of this is actually Travis Kelce, because not too many tight ends have garnered this much exposure over the last, 20 years of sports, at least that I've been watching. So lack of star power. And when you go to baseball, you think of someone like Mike Trout, and he's probably one of the greatest players there ever has been in baseball. But he's just there in Anaheim, sort of drifting away and out of consciousness for the rest of the United States. And you don't hear that name. Aaron Judge, probably because he plays in New York, you hear more of. But when you think of the Yankees, I'm sure people still think of Derek Jeter. Major League Baseball doesn't hype, doesn't market their star players enough. We don't think of a team and always think of their star player. Now, in fairness, there is a reason for this, especially now, especially with the National League and the American League, both with the DH. It's hard to argue that a pitcher is as important as a star everyday player. Because a pitcher, a starting pitcher that is, or a reliever, let's say, they don't play every game. A starting pitcher, might have 33, 35 starts, somewhere in there. A reliever might have maybe 80 in the 80s appearances throughout the year. And an everyday player, hopefully can get you at least 140, 150 games if they're relatively healthy. And so it's hard to say, but then at the same time, you think of the Arizona Diamondbacks that won in 2001 with Randy Johnson and Curt Schilling. Now, who's to take away their star power compared to who else was on that team? Who was their everyday players that you would say, wow, that's a Hall of Famer? Their pitching was their Hall of Fame. Their pitching was Curt Schilling and Randy Johnson. That was the key to them winning. So baseball does have sort of that different thing because you can't compare, just like in basketball, you can't compare maybe a center to a point guard kind of thing. But really, when you think about it, a pitcher is a very different type of player than an everyday player, whether it's shortstop, catcher, first base, outfield, whatever it might be. However, baseball does not do a good job of marketing their top players. I don't even think that the average baseball fan could tell you a star player. And when I say a star player, somebody that puts up the numbers and is a perennial all-star, or should be a perennial all-star, for 20 teams. I just don't think it can happen because I don't think baseball does that. I don't think baseball thinks that way. Okay, next. The World Series comes at a really bad time. But you have the NFL season beginning and getting into full swing. You have the NHL season starting. You have people talking about the NBA season. But primarily, as the media has pointed out this week, competing with the NFL is almost impossible. And why is that? Okay. Well, first of all, we all know that the NFL is the most popular sport in the United States. So take that off the table. Okay. Most popular sport. Probably the most wagered sport in the United States, or one of the top wagered sports in the United States, would be the NFL. Also, sort of in that same gray area or that same, let's say, industry are fantasy and daily fantasy. I mean, who doesn't play fantasy football? Who doesn't play daily fantasy? Most people, most sports enthusiasts are on DraftKings, or they have 1 to 7 fantasy football teams. So there's a reason for them watching. Okay. And the greatest thing about football, unlike baseball, where baseball's every day for 6 months, just about, give or take, 5 to 6 games every week of your team, every week. 5 to 6 games. Okay. It's a lot. It's a lot. If you have season tickets, which I've never had season tickets to baseball or football, but if you have season tickets, you're going to a lot of games. Okay. A lot of games. That's a lot of parking, a lot of beer, a lot of pretzels, a lot of hot dogs, all of that kind of stuff. Football, you have 1 game a week. You can focus in on that 1 game. And that's what makes it ideal. Plus, not to mention, football is almost completely, although it wasn't made for this, it was made before this, it's a made-for-TV event. The best seats in the house are in front of a television or some sort of screen playing the game. It's that simple. You can sit in a box, you can sit in the 50-yard line, you could be 50 rows up on the 50-yard line or whatever the max is to see over all the heads of the teams. The best place to watch the game is in front of a screen. It's that simple. Now, that's not to say that being there isn't exciting, that being there isn't pumping you up. There is that aspect. But if you want to watch the game and the aesthetics and the noise and the fandom isn't as important as watching every play, seeing the replays, hearing what the announcers and their, judge officials are saying about that play, then so be it. But the best place to be is in front of a television screen. The other thing about baseball that I keep hearing, and I think it's right, and I think they've had a problem with this for decades. Again, you look at like teams like the Royals, you look at the Pirates. A lot of these teams don't spend money. They don't spend money on purpose. Baltimore for a long time didn't spend money. They had a really good team this year. Unfortunately, they didn't go quite far as they would probably have liked to in the playoffs. But the parity in baseball, football, there's parity. You have smaller markets winning. Look at Green Bay. I mean, they're a juggernaut every year. They're at least in the even if Aaron Rodgers goes and plays for the Jets, I think they're in the top 20 rankings. So they're always ranked up there. Where in baseball, the Pirates are not going to do it. The Royals, unless they catch lightning in a bottle or do a really good job of drafting every 10 to 15 years, they're going to be a cellar dweller. It's just that simple. And there's not enough parity. Obviously, recommendations would be salary caps and all those kinds of things. And that's something that I would suggest. I mean, it makes sense because if you think about it, and not everybody watching this, and hopefully there's millions of people that will be watching this, but for the vast majority of people watching this, probably they come from a city where their team doesn't do so bad. The Giants, Los Angeles, I'm talking about the San Francisco Giants, the Los Angeles, Chicago has, they won the World Series in the last 10 years, those kinds of things. But when you think of the Pirates, they don't have a chance. They just don't, like at the beginning of the season, they don't have a chance. And it's not because of some curse, although maybe there is one that started in Pittsburgh. It's not because they play all their day games and they wear out the players and they found that to be the reason, like, that was sort of the theory with the Cubs for all those years, all the day games that they had to play. But they just don't have a chance, and it's not necessarily fair to the fans, and it doesn't excite anybody. As Americans, we want to see the underdog win, and I don't think people even realize that Arizona had a baseball team sometimes, and Texas, people don't think of people from Texas, the Dallas area, if you will, as underdogs in a lot of ways. So it just was not. It didn't have star power. I mean, you could say Garcia was one of the bigger stars, but he made himself a star in the playoffs. I don't think a lot of people would have said his name before the playoffs. Now, I had him on my fantasy team like a year ago, and I knew that he was going to be a star. However, okay, that aside, he made himself a star. He did some wonderful things until he got injured. And maybe if Texas comes back next year to the World Series, maybe by then he'll be a household name. I don't think it helped him because he got injured, because he might have been the MVP over Corey Seager, who was somewhat of a name already from the Dodgers. But it didn't have any star power. I mean, people couldn't really tell you. Nobody knew Zach Gallen, that name was not Randy Johnson. He didn't hit a bird in the air. People weren't mocking him at all-star games, things like that. It was a totally different kind of team. So, okay. The rise of streaming services, but people can watch TV whenever they want. They're not tied to a 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock start time. They can watch their shows whenever. Maybe they're not watching as much live television. Now, so I'm just saying that I'm not going to go so far on the streaming services. I do think there is something there. I think if there's no star power, if the market sizes aren't that big, if fans are maybe a little turned off, they might turn Hulu on or Netflix on rather than watching the World Series. Okay, so I do think there's some degree, but I don't think people are going to Netflix rather than the Super Bowl. So I just want to say streaming is affecting the way we watch television because we can do it on our own time, but I'm not sure that, that's maybe 5-10% at the most kind of thing. Now, the high ticket prices, and I'm going to go a little bit beyond that, the high prices of the concession stands, of a beer, of a hot dog, of a pretzel, of a hamburger, whatever you get, Rocky Mountain oysters if you're in Colorado, those high prices deter a lot of people from going to the games. You know, the average person, 2 kids, a wife, I should say, average man, average family, 4 people, 2 kids, parents, whatever it is, however you want to look at it. It's expensive when you think about it. Let's just say tickets are $50. That's okay, $200 in tickets. Let's say parking is, just going to make it easy, it's $40. Okay, so it's $240. And then let's say that everybody wants $20 worth of food. That's $320. Okay, that's $320 right there off the bat. And maybe the tickets aren't $50, maybe they're $25, so that's $220 that they're showing out. And let's be honest, if you get a soda, a hot dog, and a hamburger, that's about $20 or more at any ballpark. You know, sodas are probably $7. A pretzel is pretty close to $7. That's 14 right there. And a hot dog is, I don't know, 4 to 6 with tax. It's probably 20 or over. You know, not to mention if they want a t-shirt, a hat, a banner, you know, ice cream, whatever it may be. It's not just the ticket prices. It's the whole package. It's the parking, the concessions, the merchandise. All of those prices are so expensive at ballparks. Now, the one interesting point I want to make here, and this is totally off the beaten path, but this past year I went to PNC Park in Pittsburgh. And whenever I visit a park, I try to get apparel from the park. I try to buy a hat. I love to wear hats. And what I found about Pittsburgh, as opposed to, I live in St. Louis, but as opposed to Detroit, Milwaukee, Washington, Baltimore, places I've recently visited, ballparks I've recently visited, they didn't have as many concession stands, or not concession stands, merchandise stands. They had their team store, from what I could tell, this was the team store I was at, was about 1/8 to 1/10 the size of the team store in St. Louis and definitely in Baltimore. So, and not to mention, Detroit has a pretty sizable sort of team store as well. So it's much different in Pittsburgh. Part of it, I think, too, is they have a lower payroll. And do they need to sell the merchandise? Could they sell more merchandise? I think they probably could. But maybe people in Pittsburgh don't want to buy it because they know the team's not that good. It's a chicken or egg scenario, one that I can't answer right now on this podcast without talking to people from Pittsburgh more in-depthly. So the other problem that I see, and this kind of goes with tickets, so you don't go to as many games. Maybe when you were a kid, you went to 20 games a year. Maybe you're taking you and your family to 5 to 10 games, okay? So you're going to less games, which means that the kids and you have less number of times to get excited about that team, number one. And number two, with the way cable TV is and the rights for all of these teams are, not a lot of streaming packages, not all of the streaming packages, not all of the cable companies have the sports channels with the baseball teams on it. Baseball has to figure this out. Baseball has to bring back maybe some of those free games that were on local stations. At least when I was younger growing up, you know, it was just starting to get sort of that exclusivity on cable, but they still would have Sunday games or weekend games on local stations, or every other game was on the local station, or every third game was, or whatever it was. But it was, you know, it was maybe a third of the schedule, so a little over 50 games was on, you know, what I would call free TV, or TV that anybody can get, and people still, you know, you can get TV with, you know, rabbit ears still. So baseball really needs to think about this, or finding a way for people to watch the games. You know, even sometimes the more popular games, the games with, you know, the big rivals. Maybe, you know, one of those games out of a 3-game series would make sense, or something like that. So And let's be really honest, the average baseball fan is probably a lot older than some of the other sports. And I did not look up this. I did not do the research for this because I know this. I've seen this before. The baseball fans are getting older. The other sports fans are much younger. NBA, obviously extreme sports, anything like that, any new sports that you see, um, you know, those ages are much younger than those folks watching Major League Baseball. So cutting the games down in time, I think, was a good thing. It kept the games moving along. So I think that was a positive step that Major League Baseball made this year in that way. However, they need to do more, and I think some of that is attracting star power. Kids are still playing baseball. I mean, there are tons of kids that play select baseball around me. My son has a bunch of friends who play, high school baseball, those kinds of things. So they're still playing baseball. So there isn't a lack of interest. The numbers aren't necessarily dwindling. I think what it is, though, is marketing, seeing star power, I think would be much more important for baseball. And the next one, I hope not to spend too much time on, but baseball still has its share of lingering news issues or challenges, if you will, from steroids that probably still linger. Stories of some of the players that people think might have used or they admitted to using, they still linger. I've heard people use that as an excuse as to, those baseball players taking all those drugs to hit home runs, blah, 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 blah. It's still out there. So I don't know how you address that head on necessarily. I don't think that that's something you need to take a stand on. I think what you do is you build up players and you have more games that are on free TV, and you give out lower price tickets, and you have specials, and you get people excited about baseball. You have people going to baseball games. The one thing about baseball that is different, I think, than football is baseball is a sport that you can have a good seat and watch the game. If you think about it, in football, you don't want to be in the front row. You don't, because more than likely you have all of the players on the sidelines, or if you're on one of the end zones, you're not going to be able to see anything until someone is from the 20-yard line down. But if you're at the 50, the 40, whatever it is, you don't want to be in the front row because you can't see over the players' heads. In baseball, you can be in the front row. You can be in the first 20 rows and feel a part of the game. You can see the hitters. You can see the pitchers up close. You can see the faces they make, the things that they might be saying sometimes. Okay. Now, is it maybe a little bit better sometimes to watch it on TV? Yeah, because the 300 section where the affordable seats are doesn't give you the view that the first 20 rows gives you, and those are more higher price. But I'm saying you can feel like you're part of the game in baseball, as opposed to football, where you're there with the fans, but you're there for cheering's sake. It's not a good angle to watch football. It's a great place to be in that environment and to feel the adrenaline, like the players might, whatever the case might be, to be with the fans. Fantastic. That's what football's all about. And going to a football game is a wonderful thing. But if you want to watch a football game, you definitely want to watch it on TV. I've sat in good seats. I can tell you right now, when you go to a baseball game and you're in the front row, or if you're in the second row, it is the most exciting thing. Going home, watching it on TV, not comparable. It just isn't. And I'm not going to say that I've paid for these seats. I'm going to say that I got a huge, massive deal when I sat in the first row in Milwaukee. I've had the fortune of having some friends that had some tickets where I could sit in these kinds of seats, and there's no experience like it. There really isn't. Um, Getting back to some, how do you counter this? Okay, I already mentioned the salary cap. I think that would be a really good starting point. Now, I'm not going down in the weeds on this. There might be little angles, little tweaks, something, you know, similar to a salary cap, but called something else. I'm just, for the sake of this video, I'm just going to say, a salary cap, I think, would be a wonderful thing in baseball to make, to allow teams like Pittsburgh to play competitively in Major League Baseball. And the other thing, too, and I talked a lot about this already, is allowing people to watch the games. Now, radio, everybody can listen to the games, and baseball is a wonderful sport to listen to on radio as opposed to almost any other sport. Football's not bad. Hockey's horrible. Basketball's horrible on radio. But baseball is if football's made for TV, baseball's made for radio. And that kind of tells you the trouble baseball's in right now, because we live in a TV, a visual society as I make this video. So, and reason number 10, outside of game number 1 in the World Series, getting back to the specific theme or argument of the video, outside of game 1, that was 6-5 in 11 innings, the World Series wasn't necessarily that competitive. Okay, you had 6-5, Rangers won. You had 9-1, the Diamondbacks won. 3-1, the Rangers, not bad. Okay, 11-7, a lot of scoring. I know it was wider than 11-7 at points when the Rangers won. And then for game 5, they won 5-0. So the games weren't really that. They weren't really that competitive. So I think, had the first 2 games been extra innings and 1-run games, maybe game 3 would have been better watched than, the 8.13 million. And so that really leads me to the viewership of the World Series in 2023. As I said at the beginning of the video, this was the lowest rated World Series since 1973, since they started rating World Series and sort of averaging out per game how many millions of people watched the games. Okay, so just to go over, and hopefully if I can figure it out, I can put this stuff on the screen. If not, just bear with me on this, please. Game 1, 2 million watched. Game 2 set a record for the lowest audience in World Series history at 8.15 million viewers. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, Game 3 beat that record. They drew only 8.13 million viewers. 8.13 million viewers. Game 4 came up a little bit, 8.5 million viewers. And game 5, the winning game, the Rangers win. Probably a lot of people expecting it. Probably a lot of people in the Dallas area loving it. That game drew 11.5 million, which is more in line of what the averages were for the years prior. And I want to go into that in just a second. So overall, for the 2023 World Series, you had an average audience on TV watching the game of 9.08 million viewers. 9.08, let's just say 9.1 million viewers. 9.1, as I said. Okay. So 2023, 9.1. The second lowest was 2020, the COVID year, and that was 9.78. So about, you go from 9.1 this year, 2020 was 9.8, 2021, okay, in all seriousness, the lowest ranked was this year. The second lowest ranked was 2020. The one underneath that was 2021 at 11.7 million. Then came 2022 at 11.76 million. So 2021 was 11.74. 2022 was 11.76 million. And then number 5, rounding out, number 5 was 2012 at 12.63 million. Okay. But of the lowest ranked, of the top 5 lowest rated World Series, 4 of the 5 are the last 4 World Series. So baseball's in trouble. Baseball's very, 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 very much in trouble. In short, sort of as a recap again, the marketing is going to be important. A salary cap's important. Lower prices for tickets, lower prices for concessions, I think is key, or some sort of middle ground with that, I believe is going to be key. That they have to somehow get on free TV or make the games more available to people who don't have that cable. People are going to stop switching, YouTube TV, DirecTV, AT&T, Spectrum, Cablevision, whatever it might be. All these different things, and some of them have the local baseball games and some of them don't. And figuring that out, sometimes you have to Google things, you have to find things out. And baseball, with a higher median age of fans, people aren't always looking those things up, number one. So they have to find an easy way for people to watch the games for free. So for now, this is the first live, well, not live. This is the first recorded episode on NQK Sports. My name is Tom Geiser. Thank you for watching.